Today, I want to talk about the silent crisis that is affecting us as a community of young people, underemployment and unemployment. Disney Hall, the author of a Substack I love, writes of her own experience. 2 years unemployed now after being laid off in 2023, despite being extremely qualified and well-networked, has brought me to my knees. It's felt like the door is slamming shut on what I spent the last 10 years doing. And I am finally starting to understand maybe I'm not meant to keep trying to go that way. I need to express, I need to say something because my mouth won't let me say it out loud. A failure, I'd feel like. I don't want to hear my disappointment because I already feel it all day. The world has become so small. I just want to genuinely relate to someone. When I read her piece, especially that last line, what stood out to me wasn't the unemployment, but the loneliness. And it struck me in that moment that unemployment is what isolates us. But as Disney writes, everyone can think we're okay, but silently deep inside, we're being eaten away at. And it's taking a toll on our lives socially, psychologically, especially for young, educated people in a world that promised stability but delivered precarity instead. In this part, we're going to talk about why unemployment hits young people so hard. There's a quote on Seek, which is a job-seeking platform, and it really speaks to what I want to talk about right now, which is the education experience paradox. Many of us pursued education because we believed it would open up a steady flow of job opportunities. Not only that, we did the extracurricular activities, volunteered and upskilled through courses, yet we can still be told you don't have enough experience. And when you think about it, this is a structural issue and not a personal failure. Because honestly, when it comes to education, character, and skill building, you have got what it takes. Now, this education experience paradox needs to be addressed because many young people are following what I read is job search theory and human capital theory, which maintain that education enhances labor market outcomes, including a higher probability of employability and better earnings for individuals. But looking at the Australian context where I grew up, the Graduate Outcomes Survey measures short-term employment outcomes for recent graduates. Now, if we look at the 2024 results, there was a participation of 117,000 recent graduates in the survey, and it showed that the full-time employment rate for domestic undergraduates fell from 79% in 2023 to 74% in 2024. The overall undergraduate employment rate also decreased from 88.9% to 86.9%. Now, the statistics here are just for illustration, but even though these decreases might not seem major, the fact is there is a decrease. Another reason why unemployment hits young people so hard is the comparison tax. We're living in a digital era, and we become very aware of other people's timelines. You see your peers getting promotions, starting out exciting new opportunities, while you feel stuck and behind. And LinkedIn is one of the key aggressors in creating these feelings within us that we're behind. We can feel this quiet shame about our situation and withdraw and isolate ourselves because most conversations in society require us to share our job titles and our place of work. And now we cannot talk about why unemployment hits young people so hard without talking about the cost of living and this idea of delayed adulthood. So another part to this is the high cost of living. And when you're in your late 20s and 30s, money is very important. And by this time, you have responsibilities that cost money. I've been in Accra Ghana's capital, and it's among the top 10 African cities with the highest cost of living at the start of 2026. And you'll hear me speak about Ghana quite a bit because it is an interesting context which I'm connected to. So I enjoy looking more into what is happening there. And cities we know, like Accra, are where, and not just in Accra, but in the world, are where many educated young people intentionally move to for opportunity. But as this article described, getting by in Africa's cities is becoming increasingly expensive. From groceries to transport, everyday costs are rising faster than wages, forcing residents to stretch tight budgets just to make ends meet. And as I said, this isn't just a phenomenon in Africa, it's a worldwide trend. Now, if you're wondering why I'm making a video about this, I am a young person and I, over the past 2 years, have done a mixture of freelance, casual, and contracted work. During this time, I worked in industries as diverse as the creative industry to the higher education industry. And what I felt during this time was a lot of uncertainty. Going from one contract to the next, I needed to adapt and reevaluate my options when full-time opportunities didn't eventuate. And this is an experience that is much more common than what we talk about. We just don't hear often these real conversations because it's not a glamorous issue. It's not a glamorous circumstance. Let's be very clear. You are not underemployed or unemployed by choice. Disney writes, "Believe me, I have tried everything to apply myself to land on my feet again. And at every turn, it just doesn't work out. Multiple recommendations from CEOs and heads of departments vouching for me to land positions that didn't even have enough respect to tell me they were going with a different candidate." Now I have to ask you, has this happened to you? What I noticed during that time of what you could call precarious work circumstances was that I had a really hard time introducing myself within professional circles. And I think that's what underemployment and unemployment leads to, a questioning of our identity. Who am I and what is my importance if I don't have a job? Or the kind of job that matches my skills, potential, and qualifications. What actually happens though when you're unemployed? Some have financial buffers, but for others it becomes an immediate crisis. And there can be a difference between those who have the time to see it as a pivot and those who now are faced with an urgent need to survive. Those who don't have generous savings or support to fall back on are at risk of homelessness, inadequate access to healthcare, mental distress, and financial hardship. We can also see an intersection between poverty and crime. In an article speaking to the Ghanaian context, it is written that jobless and unemployed people are compelled to identify alternative sources of livelihood, engage in survival type activities, informal sector employment, and sometimes in unlawful practices like robbery and prostitution. The long-term impacts are grave generationally, as a preoccupation with this daily survival prevents a focus on the longer term strategies, as the Mozambican anthropologist Honwana notes in her lecture. There is also the angle that the longer, and I quote, "the longer the period that one is jobless, the more difficult it is for that person to re-enter the labour market." There are various factors that contribute to this, including the atrophy of skills during unemployment, an increase in discouragement among job seekers, which leads many unemployed to reduce their searching activities, and a stigma. A stigma in the perceptions of many employers toward any long-term unemployed job seeker. Now, when youth comprise the bulk of the long-term unemployed population, the serious concerns arise regarding the long-term loss of human capital and consequently future growth prospects. unemployment becomes a societal problem. In addition to this, one article speaking to the Ghanaian context, but we can apply it more broadly, notes that longer unemployment duration is considered a major problem in society because it increases the risk of social exclusion among its victims. Let's be very clear on what social exclusion can look like, because I read this article in the Ghanaian context again that examined how an individual's qualities and circumstances influence their length of unemployment. It was found that in Greater Accra, which hosts the country's capital, unemployment periods was about 2 years, specifically 23 months. 2 years. Can you imagine the social exclusion a person would encounter during that 2 years of time? And that leads us to waithood. Imagine you are searching for jobs, or now you've lost the motivation to do so because you're faced with so many obstacles and rejections. Your life is passing by. So waithood is a term that was originally used by Diane Singerman in relation to youth in the Middle East, which means waiting for adulthood, and is used by Honwana to describe this prolonged period, and I'm quoting, of suspension when young people's access to social adulthood is delayed or denied. While their chronological age may define them as adults, they have not been able to attain the social markers of adulthood: earning a living, being independent, establishing families, providing for their offspring and other relatives, and becoming taxpayers. They are consigned to a liminal space in which they are neither dependent children nor autonomous adults. This can really challenge a young person's place in the world, and a job is often the prerequisite for full participation in society. Honwana shares that her research shows that there is nothing passive, though, about young people experiencing this phenomenon, because they are proactively or have been proactively engaged in serious efforts to create new forms of being and interacting with society. We won't go into much detail at this particular point, but we know that wherever you are in the world, there are going to be unemployed and underemployed people, but where you are also determines your experience. Another point that we won't spend too much time on because it's not the focus of this video, but is worth mentioning, and that is Honwana in her lecture did state that during waithood, spaces of creativity can be cultivated. She also cites British cultural studies researchers who examined subcultures as responses to marginalization. We can point here as well to young people making YouTube videos, creating an online presence, sharing their experiences, but also picking up other skills, because when you do build an online presence, you're building your skills in design, in marketing, in storytelling. And so that could be a way for you to also increase your social capital. And that can be happening during this time of unemployment or underemployment. But remember, that's if you're fortunate enough to have access to a phone and to the resources to do that, including reliable energy and electricity, which we know is a serious issue on the African continent, and also in areas in high-income countries as well, because in order to access electricity, you're going to need to pay bills for that. And to pay bills, you need a job. So let's look then at what do societies actually do then about employment. So what we're actually going to do is compare Scandinavia, or a Scandinavian country, with Ghana. Why did I pick a European country? Because I wanted to read up and learn about what was some of the responses they were making in this area of unemployment. And I came across an article that, while it's a bit old, I did find it a good starting point. And it was looking at the effectiveness of active labor market policies, particularly within Denmark and Sweden. Now, I hadn't really heard this terminology before, and recently, since attending the G20 summit, I've become very interested in economics and political economy. But active labor market policies are defined by the European Centre for Social Welfare Policy and Research as measures to help individuals enter the labour market or to prevent already employed individuals from losing their jobs. ALMPs, for short, include various measures from training to job search assistance, subsidies, supported employment opportunities, and programs to support entrepreneurial activities. Looking at Denmark, which at the time of the article was referenced to as adopting a flexicurity model, which encompasses generous unemployment benefits and social assistance, and also active labour market policies, which are seen in Denmark, or at least at the time of writing of the article, as the three key ingredients in that flexicurity model. And so among the various programs that occur in Denmark, a large share of spending and coverage is targeted towards training. What that implies is that a better skilled population is going to mean that they are going to be better equipped for the labor market. In that article, it was reported that a key element of successful active labor market policies has been found to be the coaching or conversations between unemployed people and caseworkers. On this topic, there are studies that have been done that show the benefits of having conversations with caseworkers, and that the more that these conversations happen, the better the outlook for the unemployed in the labor market. I've participated in a similar sort of program and mentoring, I guess you could say, assistance within Australia, and it was great to have someone to speak with. However, it's also important to note that, again, you are not guaranteed anything from those particular training programs or mentoring programs, in the sense that, at least with some of these models, there is no guaranteed job at the end of that. And so you can sometimes be caught in a cycle of seeking out a lot of support and maybe not still making a headway. Now, that's not to say that these programs are not successful, but I think we also need to keep an open mind about the effectiveness and question it so that it can be better. So we looked at Scandinavian countries like Denmark. What about a sub-Saharan country like Ghana? Because we like to talk about Ghana here. So, and we're going to be bringing hopefully more of the Australian context in too. But there is a focus on entrepreneurship initiatives, and there is a recent initiative called the Ajumura program. It is run by the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, NIP for short, which is committing to creating at least 10,000 sustainable businesses annually and supporting them with training, funding, and mentorship. And that is a conversation for another video. But there did seem to be a focus on these entrepreneurship initiatives from the Ghanaian standpoint, and that as a means of addressing unemployment. Also, technical and vocational education training, TVET for short, is also critical within the Ghanaian context, and it is coordinated by the Council of Technical and Vocational Education Training. So I believe this is getting a certificate in a particular trade, in a particular industry. And then also the other strategy that Ghana looks at is formal job creation, but I'm still reading on how this will be achieved. It's important that we contextualize this issue of unemployment within the global context. The International Labour Organization has reported that while global unemployment remains stable, millions of workers still lack access to quality jobs. The current Director General of the ILO, for short, is actually, I found out, the first African to hold this office. And he commented, resilient growth and stable unemployment figures should not distract us from the deeper reality. Hundreds of millions of workers remain trapped in poverty, informality, and exclusion. Now, the ILO has also reported that youth unemployment globally reached 12.4% in 2025. And an intersectional group of youth that can be left out are those that are not in education, employment, or training, which the ILO measured at 27.9%. So you'll note that jump if we look at that section of young people. It's 27.9% specifically of youth in low-income countries who are not in education, employment, or training. Like I said before, we'll take these statistics with a grain of salt because there is so much that goes into knowing which are the reliable statistics to be using, but I guess this is just a general guide, so please go and have a look if you're interested and maybe look up some more specific country profiles. According to the World Bank, looking at youth unemployment as a percentage of the total labor force, with youth being 15 to 24 years old, in 2024 in Denmark, the youth unemployment rate was 12.1%. In Australia, it was 9.5%. And in Ghana, it was 5.4%. While 5.4% is lower compared with Denmark and Australia, Denmark and Australia are both considered high-income countries. And as high-income countries, they have a lower percentage of the population engaged in informal employment. When we compare that to Ghana, it is a lower middle income country and it has a higher informal employment rate. And in general, we know that formal employment provides more labor protections, entitlements, and relative security. The unemployment rate in Ghana has been quoted as much, much higher in other sources. So like I said, let's do our own digging. This is also worth noting the cultural narratives around work and worth. So regardless of where we each live, we know unemployment is highly stigmatized and it engenders strong opinions and perspectives about what it means to be a valuable member of society. However, while a person may escape the stigma of being unemployed through work, we have to also consider the quality of a person's work in the long term. In its recent report, the ILO has said that a slowdown in shifting economies into higher value industries or services is a major obstacle to sustained progress in job quality and productivity growth. You know, sometimes when anyone is talking about the success of a particular program and they are quoting the numbers, they are quoting the volume of people who have been engaged in a training, upskilling program. We get impressed when we hear hundreds of thousands, even millions, or we just hear what is considered a high figure and we think, oh, that's great, that is solving the issue. But then as this perspective shows, if we have societies where there aren't high value add industries, then we have to question as well the people that are really, let's just be real, slogging it out. So we can be more concerned that someone is employed rather than concerned about their well-being and safety because they might be in a relatively dangerous job or a job that is threatening their health and their security. But because they have a job, we'll take it. Also, for example, in a 2013 lecture, Honwana, the Mozambican anthropologist that we've spoken about in this video, gave the example of, the pronunciation of this term, ligue, and it is a word in Wolof, which is the national language of Senegal and means work. And Honwana says that ligue is considered an important marker of adulthood, and it defines a person's self-worth and position in the family and in the community. Yet the majority of young people in Senegal and elsewhere in Africa are unable to attain the sense of dignity embedded in the notion of ligue. So let's also speak about creation of dignified work, dignified employment. That is part of this important conversation. Returning to the words of Disney when we opened, she said in relation to her experience, I need to express, I need to say something because my mouth won't let me say it out loud. A failure, I'd feel like. I don't want to hear my disappointment because I already feel it all day. The world has become so small. I just want to genuinely relate to someone. Now, the aim of this video isn't to provide neat solutions to such an entrenched crisis, but to further the conversations that are being had on unemployment, because it is something that as young people, we should be speaking about more collectively. I'd love to hear your ideas for solutions though, and for us to have maybe more of a conversation about that in the comments, because I'd love to hear your perspectives and learn from your wisdom and experience. How has unemployment shaped how you see yourself? What did no one warn you about? And what support actually helped you or someone you know? Let me know down in the comments and let's have a discussion there. I really appreciate you for tuning in, and I look forward to chatting more in the comments. Until next time, Yabeshia Medasipa. Bye. See you in the next one.